computer. And I'm going to count down. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Dzień dobry, Państwo. I am Dr. Michel S. Pawlowski, and I welcome you from the heartland of America, Chicago, Illinois, from the fields of Wisconsin and the sunshine state of Florida to this very special program on WPNA Radio 1490, the Polish National Alliance Radio, Chicago, Illinois. Our program is being picked up by Polish radio stations throughout the United States and is live streamed on the internet. We now have a new YouTube channel also where you can view our entire broadcast. Please visit YouTube under the heading Polish Americans for Trump 2020 Show. It gives me great pleasure today to talk about our special guest. He is Dr. Henry P. Phil Williams III. He is currently an adjunct professor at the Institute of World Politics in Washington, D.C. He has received many degrees, diplomas from Culver Military Academy, the Universities of Virginia, Edinburgh, and Florence, and a PhD, because we call him Dr. Phil Williams. He is a PhD in international law and diplomacy from the Fletcher School, Tufts University. He has worked in 4 foreign languages and studied and worked more than 10 years of his life on the Mediterranean, including stints in Turkey doing doctoral research, investment banking, and university level teaching. He is active in many civic organizations where I first met him, and the new president of the Charlottesville, Virginia branch of the English-Speaking Union. He is also past Virginia state president of the Sons of the American Revolution. He has lectured widely, appeared on national public radio, and is published in scholarly journals. Allow me, audience, to introduce you to our special guest today, Dr. Henry P. Phil Williams, who will speak to us today about overall Trump foreign policy and how it impacts all of us and how it may impact Polish Americans. Phil, you are on.
Well, thank you very much, Michel. It's a great honor and an opportunity to be with you personally again and to be speaking to your audience. You mentioned the Sons of the American Revolution. While it is true that I don't believe I have a drop of Polish blood in me, I have been a favorite son and a friend of Poland and Polish Americans for a long time, as you know. And my connection to Polish people actually dates all the way back to the American Revolution, when one of my ancestors, who was an officer, and he served under General Tadeusz Kościuszko, in the engineering corps of the American Revolutionary Army. I am descended from him, so I do have a long-term connection with Polish people and the extraordinary things that they have achieved in America, in Poland, and around the world. So it's a great pleasure to be here today, and really what I'd like to do is make sure that your listeners take a very serious stock of the situation in this coming election. There are 2 very clear choices. One of them is a bit scary. I think it's possibly leading this country further down the wrong path, and that's the Democrat Party and the Biden-Harris ticket. The one thing I'd like to say about Donald Trump, even if you don't always find him to be as courteous as you might like, he's got gut instincts, and he believes in traditional Judeo-Christian American values. And given what's going on in this country now and the domestic chaos in this country, we need a law and order man. But my particular focus today is, of course, going to be on international relations and the foreign policy of the Trump administration versus the foreign policy that one might expect in a Biden administration, as evidenced by the foreign policies of Barack Obama and Biden when he was vice president. I will say that the audience should heed the words of Dr. Gates, the head of Homeland Security in the previous administration, who said that Joe Biden never got a foreign policy question right in his life. So let's begin right there and see what has Donald Trump been doing for the last 4 years and why I believe we should stay the course. So Michelle, if I may continue here, let me just say that an effective foreign policy begins with a strong economy at home.
You have the floor.
An effective foreign policy begins with a strong economy at home. I'll come back to further discuss the importance of a strong, balanced economy that is not overly dependent on foreign sources of supply at the end of distant supply chains later in my conversation here. And additionally, while diplomacy is always preferred, foreign policy is more effective if it is backed by a strong state-of-the-art military. Our president, Donald Trump, has given America back a state-of-the-art military. This needs to continue for us to be effective diplomatically around the world. Let me begin, particularly as it concerns Polish Americans, the situation in the Baltic states and Poland and Hungary and Czechoslovakia in the eastern part of NATO and the eastern part of the EU. Poland has been partitioned too many times in its history, not to desperately need a friend of Poland when it comes to military support. That he has in spades with President Donald Trump. Donald Trump is up the ante, both in the Baltics and in Poland. As Mike Pompeo has said, they're prepared to invest an additional $1 billion in infrastructure in Eastern Europe as an alternative to the Russian Nord Stream gas pipeline that is an $11 billion gas pipeline that's primarily running through to Eastern Europe and Germany to supply them heating oil. That will only make Germany and it will only make Eastern Europe more dependent on Russian oil supplies. In addition to that, it will also compromise the oil that's currently coming into Eastern Europe via Ukraine. This is done intentionally. The Russians are trying to circumvent the existing pipeline in Ukraine so as not to have to pay any transmission fees for gas coming through Ukraine. No surprise here. And Donald Trump has been a friend to Ukraine as well. I think the previous presidents in support of Ukraine's independence has managed to set tents and pillows and various things to make life more comfortable for the soldiers in Ukraine, whereas Donald Trump has actually sent offensive military equipment and is trying his best to help stall Russian imperialism in Eastern Europe and all the way down into Crimea, which Putin annexed back in 2014. And it's important to have a president that will stand by Eastern Europe in its efforts to protect itself against a very real Russian threat. Additionally, the president has stood up to NATO and said, look, you know, you members, you need to pay a little bit more of your fair share. You've been riding on our coattails for decades here in NATO, and it's time that you all step up to the plate a little bit. And I think it's time that NATO heard that. They didn't like it. It's a different tone than they've heard for the last few presidents. But Donald Trump is right. NATO and Europe needs to invest in its own security, backed by the United States, but it needs to invest, it needs to co-invest as well. And when you think about the economy in the EU, I must say that I'm sympathetic with the East European states that want to maintain their political sovereignty. It's one thing to surrender a certain amount of one's economic sovereignty to Brussels. Yes, they're going to tell you exactly what size the toilet seat has to be and so forth and so on. But at some point, they can't dictate to you what the foreign policy of your nation state should be. They cannot tell Poland, you must take X number of Muslim refugees from the Middle East. And the president stands with the Poles and the East Europeans in their concerns. These are smaller countries. They can't absorb large amounts of Muslims into their societies without them being ghettoized and potentially become the same kind of problem that they have actually become in France and Germany. So the president supports Poland's independence, political independence, to determine its own foreign policy. And I think this is unlikely to be the case with a Biden-Kamala Harris presidency or occupation of the White House. So I recommend that Americans, all Americans, and Polish Americans, vote for the president. I think his instincts about how to protect America, both at home and abroad, are right. No one gets all the details right, but I believe he is honest. I believe he cares about this country, and I believe that he's very concerned about the growth of and threat of socialism in the United States, what it will do to America, and how that will translate into our foreign policy around the world. I might also note that President Trump has brought troops home from the Middle East. His basic instinct is if you're in it to win it, you're in it to win it. If you're not, get out of it. These wars that go on interminably, like the war in Afghanistan, now running into its 19th year, it just with no signs of real improvement, are places where the United States needs to disengage militarily, not diplomatically, needs to continue to work with its allies, but needs to gradually transition the local national militaries in these countries where we find ourselves. Also in Syria, for example, we need to transition those domestic militaries into viable militaries to deal with their own issues in their own country, and we'll continue to work on their behalf diplomatically. So I think there are lots of areas, Michelle, where the president, his policies for America, and it's, keep in mind, it's very difficult. You can't win for losing. Somebody's going to be unhappy. You decide to move the capital in Israel to Jerusalem, where it should legitimately be, and as has been promised by 3 previous presidents. Trump is the guy that did it. And our Israeli allies are most appreciative of that, and the help that we've given them in thinking outside the box in the Middle East and managing to create a diplomatic environment where they're bringing in the United Arab Emirates and others. If Trump's presidency continues, other states, other Muslim states in the Middle East will come in to that organization and seek to find a peaceful solution to the Arab-Israeli, Israeli-Palestinian issues in that hotspot that just won't ever cool down. So these are just some of the areas, Michelle, where I think the president's leadership is something that should be cherished. It's easy to make mistakes, but by and large, he's been right on the money, and Joe Biden has never gotten it right.
You are so right, Dr. Phil. Dr. Phil, you've got a lot of experience working on foreign policy. Can you touch base just briefly about China?
Yes, and this concerns all Americans, not just Polish Americans. China is an existential threat to the United States and to Western civilization. It's as simple and as scary and as serious as that. Were it only an economic contest, not so lucky Chinese have been very aggressively building up their military and their naval capacity. They've been seen to be aggressive in the South China Sea, and Taiwan have actually had military clashes on the border with India. And more subtly, and I would say more perniciously, the Chinese program known as the Belt Road Initiative is the modern day equivalent of the ancient Silk Road. But the difference here now is the Chinese are slowly investing in infrastructure and relations with countries that reconnect China with the West via the Indian Ocean, via Africa, via the Suez and the Mediterranean, and then by rail across northern China through Kazakhstan and into Russia. They are slowly, I would say, infiltrating, along with their ideology and totalitarian government, but they're soft pedaling it, and they're bringing a big checkbook along with it. And the United States has to be extremely vigilant here in leading NATO and leading the West in dealing with this confrontation, which is, I say, not just economic. It's not just Chinese economic imperialism in the form of the Belt Road Initiative. It's the military aggression that we are seeing today. And that brings me back to something that I said right at the beginning. The strength of America's foreign policy is very dependent on a strong economy at home. Donald Trump has stood up to the Chinese, has looked at the trade imbalances and said that they were grossly unfair and unreasonable, and has renegotiated deals with the Chinese, but had to put up tariffs to get the Chinese to the negotiating table. The same is true for the trade deal with NAFTA, which was sorely in need of being redone. You had to bring the Canadians and the Mexicans back to the negotiating table to create more reasonable terms of trade between our countries. And when I say it's important to build up the domestic economy to support our foreign policy, I mean following Donald Trump's lead in trying to attract foreign capital and corporations to return to the United States by having lowered the corporate tax rate dramatically in the United States to more traditional, typical levels that one sees in other countries around the world. Ours were higher, well higher than the vast majority of them. Bring them down and bring some of that manufacturing base back to the United States. America cannot afford to have 90% of all its medicines and pills produced in China. The logistics chains are too long, and being dependent on China is too risky for the United States. We need to be doing things like building up, rebuilding some of our strategic manufacturing capabilities. And that would include today silicon chips for computers, which are now almost all made in China. America has the genius to develop the software needed to advance in the 21st century. We're still ahead there, but we're totally dependent for too much of the parts and equipment for computers, which have basically been subcontracted out by American corporations and others to China. We cannot have that kind of risk going forward, and we gradually need to move some of those assets, manufacturing assets, closer to America and in fact, back into America. And to be more specific, how about right back into the Midwest? The Midwest is what had the hell beaten out of it as the globalists moved to find the cheapest source of labor to do everything in the world, and eventually put the United States at risk by having excessively long supply chains to countries in many cases we can't trust. So I think Trump is the guy that sees this, that understands this. And I'll tell you, just to go one step further, this contest with the Chinese, Donald Trump had the foresight to create a Space Force. Boy, that sounds like something out of Hollywood. Guess what? It's not. It's cyber warfare in the 21st century. And if we don't get our act together in space, and if we don't have that capability in the United States to launch our own rockets and satellites into the United States and stay on top of that technology, the United States is going to be seriously disadvantaged. And you have to have an infrastructure and an economy that will support that. And I'm very happy to say that the last American astronaut to ride into space on a Russian rocket left about 3 weeks ago, and that's the end. We now have American private enterprise produce 2 different companies producing rockets that can deliver substantial payloads into space. How does that happen? It happens with a president who understands you need to deregulate the economy. You need to turn the capitalist economy and the entrepreneurs, you need to turn them loose and not tie them all up with regulation. I don't mean no regulation. I just mean you have to stop hamstringing them with too much regulation. Look what happened when we deregulated in the energy sector. The United States has a very different position in the world in its foreign policy today, precisely because of fracking, precisely because America has become energy independent. That has given us an advantage and facilities in our worldwide foreign policy that we haven't had since the 1920s. Our NATO allies are still dependent on Middle Eastern oil, but the United States is not. And when it comes to getting, when the United States is a net exporter of energy, and guess where some of that energy is being allocated? To Eastern Europe, to help support Poland and the states of Eastern Europe and Europe to become less dependent on Russia for its energy and for gas in particular. But Donald Trump is the guy that's had the foresight to deregulate and to help industry in the United States come back, lower taxes, to bring corporations, to bring manufacturing capacity, especially in strategic industries, and to incentivize them to return to the United States, and had the foresight to realize that the existential threat we face with China is not just economic, it's military. And at the end of the day, within 2 or 3 decades, this is a war that will be determined in space.
You are so correct. You know, your remarks are they cover the whole spectrum of what we need to be concerned about. A problem I have is that many Americans, including Polish Americans, need a better understanding of economics and how it drives foreign policy, how it affects our overall national security. So I think you shined a light on something that's very important for everybody to understand.
Well, Michelle, let me add one more thing. You know, MAGA, Make America Great Again. One thing that people should understand, and sometimes listening to Donald Trump, it's not so easy. He's not very nuanced. It's not very easy to understand that. But making America great again begins at home. And I've just shown you the connection and the ramifications of having a strong economy at home in order to have a strong foreign policy. What people should understand is making America great is not a zero-sum game. It's not if America wins, somebody else loses. To be more precise, it's actually America wins and the West wins. It's that simple. If America is strong, America is leading, America is supporting in every fire, every disaster, economic issues, and military issues. If we look to strengthen America, then America can do the same job it did coming out of World War II. We were not able to take the leadership coming out of World War II because we were economically and militarily weak. Exactly the opposite. All the New World Order, which people like to talk about, that was beautifully set up, and all the engineering for that developed the United Nations and the various international organizations and WHO and the European Coal and Steel Community and the Marshall Plan, all of that came out of American strength and economic strength and manufacturing strength and intellectual property development capabilities that we had in a relatively unregulated economy in the United States. We have to do that again. The same engineering and the same superstructure that worked 60 or 70 years ago isn't necessarily what we need today. What we need today, at the very least, requires American leadership, and you cannot have American leadership if you do not have a strong economy at home. And that's an economy that where employment levels have, under Donald Trump's presidency, have been brought down to record low levels, and where for the first time in several decades, the real wage earning of blue collar workers has actually been increasing. With the lowest unemployment for Blacks, Latinos, every category you could think, a rising tide floats all boats. Regulation is like drilling a hole in the bottom of the ship. Too much regulation. It'll sink again. We need a strong economy to do the job America wants to do at home. And if America gets its act together at home, then America can afford to lead. We have bankrupted ourselves with guns and butter in the Vietnam era and got ourselves into very difficult problems economically. But so we have to rebuild the American economy. President Trump has shown that he can do that. He actually has done it in record time. He had some momentum coming out of the previous administration, but after all is said and done, Barack Obama's economic growth and success was the slowest recovery in history that's ever been recorded. So Trump didn't start from scratch, but he started out right, and he started out fast, and he started getting things out of people's way so that they could produce in America to the benefit of all Americans. And when all Americans benefit, then the chance for America to benefit the world increases exponentially.
You are so correct, Dr. Phil. You know, your students in your classes they have a real great experience to have the opportunity to listen to you, your words of wisdom, and give them the opportunity to see what the world is like today, the challenges that Donald Trump faces, and what we need to be aware of in terms of foreign policy, domestic policy, the road ahead to the future. I would like to ask you, Dr. Phil, is there any closing remarks you'd like to say to our audience?
I think so. I think there are a couple things that, I've said, and I've talked about Donald Trump's success in various areas in Israel, taking out Soleimani, the leading purveyor of Iranian terrorism, essentially shutting down ISIS. There are a lot of things that he has achieved. But one of the things that is really important is that America and traditional American values not be compromised. And Donald Trump, when it comes to right to life, when it comes to recognizing the importance of faith, anybody's faith, but the freedom to practice one's faith, which is protected by the First Amendment, and the right to defend oneself domestically in this country in the Second Amendment. These are areas that help strengthen the fabric of America. America is not safe, to be honest, if the only people that have guns are criminals in the government. So our forefathers understood this, having shed themselves from a tyranny in England and in the course of our independence. And I think Donald Trump has done a good job in trying to at least fight for the right for people to keep people from trying to suggest that there's something illegal or immoral about bringing one's faith into the public sphere. This also is a part of strengthening the American economy. People have to be free to speak. They have to be free to speak differently than whatever the current leftist-oriented thoughts are and ideologies that are being shoved down our throats. Stop the white shaming. Stop the critical race theory. These are things that will tear down the United States. They will not build them up. This is not enlightened democracy. Trust me. So I really think that what you're facing with a Biden Harris ticket is a severely compromised domestic economy and a foreign policy that will be as vague and nebulous as any foreign policy could ever have been, because our president really is clueless. For all the experience he's had, I think he's basically clueless on how to lead in the world. He can follow. I just don't see him as a leader. Donald Trump, difficult as he can be, is a leader.
Thank you so very much, Dr. Phil. I know you are a very busy person. There are a lot of people requesting your time and attention. So we want to thank you so very much for giving us the opportunity to speak with you and you to shed the light from your perspective as a very knowledgeable and educated person on the future and how important it is to elect Donald Trump our president. Thank you again. I want to thank our audience for listening today and remind our audience, if you have any follow-up questions for Dr. Phil Williams, you can send them to our special email address, which is Mogul, M-O-G-U-L. That stands for the Secret Service name given to our president by the Secret Service, Mogul at PolishAmericansForTrump.org. That's Mogul at PolishAmericansForTrump.org. Remember, if you want to enter our contest to win 2 tickets to the Black Tie and Boots inaugural ball, please send us your name and address along with your comments. We would love to hear from you. Dr. Phil and our Polish audience, dziękuję. We have many outstanding guests in the future, and dziękuję bardzo. Do
Na zdrowie.
No.
Na zdrowie. Thank you, Michelle. It was a great honor.
Thank you.
Great honor. Thank you.